They came bearing ultimatums wrapped in arrogance. The Tsarn dominion, spanning over 200 systems, had known nothing but victory for centuries. Their fleets had crushed rebellions, their diplomats had coerced empires, and their war doctrine had never faced defeat. When humanity emerged beyond its spiral arm, expanding with unsettling speed, the Tsarn saw not a species to ally with, but one to contain. Human independence was branded infectious. Their refusal to adopt galactic protocols was called dangerous. The Tsarn's highest chamber debated not if they should intervene, but how brutal the introduction should be. Their decision was swift. An ultimatum was drafted: Earth would surrender sovereignty, dismantle its defense systems, and integrate into the Dominion's structure as a vassal world. Compliance would be rewarded with peace, resistance would bring annihilation. The message was delivered in full ceremonial dress. A towering hologram of the Tsarn Grand Strategist was projected over the Terran Council chambers. He offered no pleasantries, only a countdown. 10 days to comply. No response came. Not one word. No defiance. No submission. Only silence. To the Tsarn, it was weakness. To the Council of Species, it was foreboding. Several delegates quietly advised restraint, recalling the scattered reports of humanity's past: wars waged on scales no other species dared attempt, entire continents reshaped, skies blackened by their own machines. But the Tsarn did not listen. They were beyond caution. They had grown drunk on conquest. Tsarn scouts had already clashed with the human outpost during early border skirmishes. The outpost was considered expendable, until the humans retaliated. In under 16 hours, 3 Tsarn patrol cruisers were turned into floating debris. No survivors. Their remains were found later, incinerated with surgical precision. No shots wasted. No prisoners taken. Still, the Tsarn believed that was a fluke. Guerrilla tactics. Nothing that could stand against a full fleet. And so, 10 days later, with no response from Earth, the Tsarn sent their ships forward. A small display of force. Just enough to remind the humans of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. They targeted Epsilon Prime first, a newly terraformed colony with a civilian population of 70,000. They didn't bother hailing the outpost. Their cruisers entered orbit and began bombardment within minutes, melting the atmosphere and shattering the infrastructure with plasma lances. The destruction was streamed live across Dominion channels. A spectacle. A lesson. One they thought the humans would not forget. They were right, but not in the way they expected. Earth's silence continued for another hour. Then the stream ended. Not by signal interference. Not by malfunction. The Tsarn broadcast was hijacked. Across every Dominion comm channel, a single symbol appeared, an ancient Terran character. It pulsed slowly, once, twice, and then vanished. Back on the Dominion's homeworld, the Grand Strategist was informed Earth had activated something called Protocol Leviathan. The name meant nothing to them. It should have. From Titan's blackened shipyards, deep in the Saturnian shadows, war engines emerged, silent, cold, and faster than anything the Tsarn had ever measured. Entire fleets that had never been acknowledged in public Terran records came online, armed with weapons the rest of the galaxy had only theorized. AI commanders with unrestricted strategic directives were deployed, untethered from human oversight. Orbital defense systems that had slept for decades awoke and calibrated with chilling calm. Satellites previously disguised as decommissioned space junk pivoted and realigned. They didn't broadcast warnings. They didn't ask for parley. They targeted. Humanity did not reply to threats with negotiation. They answered war with extinction. The Dominion had demanded submission. What they received was something else entirely: quiet, deliberate annihilation. In that moment, the galaxy realized something vital. The silence from Earth had never been hesitation. It had been calculation. The humans hadn't been paralyzed by fear. They had been preparing. And now they were done preparing. They begged for war. The old galactic saying would go. Humans delivered. The Tsarn believed in overwhelming force, and Epsilon Prime had burned accordingly. They assumed that devastation would fracture human resolve. Instead, it became the spark that ignited the full machinery of Earth's wrath. Within 90 minutes, Terran High Command initiated full war protocols. Civilian networks across Sol were blacked out. Encrypted channels came alive. Strategic command centers buried under continents synchronized, not to defend, but to erase. The first wave was immediate and silent. 7 Dominion-controlled systems experienced simultaneous loss of communications. No warnings, no declarations. Entire planetary grids collapsed under the weight of cascading logic bombs. Dominion AI cores were infiltrated and overridden before they could even recognize hostile code. What remained were paralyzed defense platforms, blind orbital sensors, and command crews deafened to one another. On the third hour, Earth launched the second wave. From the Oort cloud, long-range kinetic strikes emerged, moving at relativistic speed. No propulsion signatures, no heat trails. Just dense tungsten slugs guided by gravitational fields and hidden transponders. By the time they were detected, it was too late. Impact on the Zarn colony of Vorshek registered as a seismic event exceeding any planetary record. The colony ceased to exist in a single flash, its crust fractured like glass. Simultaneously, at the edges of Zarn territory, human stealth cruisers executed boarding operations on Dominion relay stations. Not to seize them, but to gut them. Human operatives, enhanced with neurocombat suites, disabled systems in complete silence. In some cases, Dominion personnel never saw their attackers. They simply found control rooms flooded with antioxygen foam or depressurized to lethal vacuum. No damage to structure. Just death. The Zarn assembled task forces, dispatching fleets to intercept. They expected direct engagement. Instead, they encountered ghost fleets, decoys with AI and AV loops, jamming signals, and false telemetry. Some Zarn vessels chased these illusions for days, only to run out of fuel and be left adrift. Others found themselves redirected by hacked NAV systems straight into black holes or solar flares. Where the Zarn sought conquest, humans delivered confusion. The Terran Strategic Warfare Division had studied Zarn doctrine for decades. Every tactical move, every psychological profile of their admirals, every weakness in command hierarchy. Their war doctrine wasn't reaction, it was anticipation. They didn't wait for Zarn responses. They scripted them. The Zarn's greatest weakness was predictability. Their battle formations followed rigid hierarchies. Their fleets relied on centralized command AI and synchronous timing. Humanity exploited that mercilessly. Dominion battleships would arrive at reinforced checkpoints, only to find the station already destroyed and the planet sterilized. Their logistical lines were severed. Fuel depots vanished. Communications hubs vaporized with pinpoint accuracy. By day 3, the Dominion's Third Armada, once considered invincible, had lost 43% of its ships without a single full engagement. Captured fragments of Zarn communications revealed panic at the top. One message stood out, asterisk. They don't fight us. They hunt us. Asterisk. Humanity didn't waste resources. They didn't claim territory. They didn't occupy. They erased. On day 5, the Dominion dispatched its most decorated fleet marshal to lead a decisive counteroffensive near the star system of Nethrax. Intelligence showed a sizable human force gathering there. When the Zarn arrived, they found the system filled with floating debris, burned-out husks of their own captured vessels arranged into patterns visible from orbit. Above it all hovered a single Terran transmission buoy broadcasting one line in perfect Dominion dialect. Asterisk. You drew first blood. We'll write the last chapter. Asterisk. Behind them, a fleet decloaked, fast, modular, adapted mid-combat, with AI-controlled subvessels operating independently. The battle lasted 7 minutes. No Zarn ship survived. Back on Earth, there were no victory parades. No announcements. Humanity remained silent. What terrified the galaxy most wasn't the power, but the precision. The war was not emotional. It was deliberate. Mechanical. Humans weren't driven by rage. They were executing a decision. Efficiently. Without compromise. To the Tsarn, war had been a display of dominance. To humanity it was math. Input, aggression. Output, obliteration. The Dominion wanted submission. What they got was judgment. The Dominion still believed in numbers. Despite catastrophic losses, they retained the largest fleet in the quadrant. 3-to-1 superiority. Hundreds of capital ships. Thousands of strike cruisers. Reinforcements pulled from distant sectors. They mobilized reserves not seen since the subjugation wars. The plan was direct, overwhelming force to crush the Terran offensive and reassert control. Humanity never gave them that chance. Operation Scorch Echo initiated without ceremony. Human cybernetics divisions embedded deep within Dominion networks activated embedded exploits. Civilian infrastructure collapsed. Energy grids failed. Transit hubs froze. Tsarn command scrambled for cohesion, but every digital relay sparked confusion instead of orders. Algorithms turned on their creators. Tactical simulations degraded into noise. Data that had once guided invasions now issued contradictory commands. Terran strike teams, inserted years before during peacetime trade missions, activated across critical locations. They weren't soldiers. They were infrastructure saboteurs, linguists, cultural analysts. Their goal wasn't combat, it was disintegration. From within. Food processing centers received contaminant instructions. Hydroponic systems flooded. Medicine logistics rerouted to uninhabited moons. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. But worlds starved, choked, and crumbled under quiet disruption. No one could trace it back. No one needed to. The effect was already irreversible. Humanity didn't need to outgun the Dominion. They simply had to pull one thread at a time until the entire empire unraveled. By the second week, entire sectors had gone dark. The Dominion Corps began to fracture. Desperate commanders turned to outdated manual coordination. Convoys moved without sensor coverage. They were ambushed within hours. Civilian broadcasts begged for clarity, then turned to static. Leaders vanished. Some defected. Others simply disappeared. On the edges of the Dominion's central systems, Terran fleets gathered. No fanfare. No transmission. Just presence. They didn't form walls. They didn't blockade. They isolated. And then they struck. The first core world fell in under 20 hours. Not through orbital bombardment, but infrastructure collapse followed by surgical decapitation. Human precision strikes decimated political leadership, data banks, and AI command cores. Cities remained standing. Populations unharmed. But governance ceased. Entire planets stared skyward, waiting for the next blow that never came. The Second Core world fought back. They had time to prepare, local defenses reinforced. But humanity bypassed them completely. Terran quantum siphons redirected the system's energy output. Within minutes, orbital platforms went dark, ground defenses shut down, and planetary shields failed. The last message broadcast by the Tsarn planetary governor was interrupted mid-sentence. After that, silence. Every move was calculated to unmake, not to conquer. Dominion officers struggled to explain the enemy's behavior. No resources seized. No demands made. Not even declarations of victory. Human fleets would strike, dismantle, and vanish. Territories once ruled with iron doctrine became directionless. The Dominion wasn't being fought, it was being erased from relevance. Terran strategic divisions began targeting culture next. Libraries, temples, symbols of Dominion identity were neutralized. Not burned. Not desecrated. Rewritten. Key figures in Tsarn mythology were revealed, via hacked educational networks, to be Terran fabrications. Generations of Dominion pride were replaced with confusion. Heritage became uncertainty. History became suspect. Civil resistance surged. But not against humans. Against their own failing government. The Dominion's hierarchy, built on obedience and order, could not survive ambiguity. Their systems depended on trust and structure. Humanity targeted that trust, not the structures themselves. The effect was catastrophic. Zarn morale disintegrated. Captured communications from military command showed rising desperation. One admiral described Terran's strategy as unreasonably effective. Another pleaded for assistance from allied species, only to receive terse refusals. No empire would risk drawing Terran attention. The galaxy watched. No one moved. In less than 30 standard days, the Zarn went from dominant power to fragmented regime. Their fleets, once symbols of fear, floated abandoned in orbit, stripped of purpose. Their core systems, rich with history and pride, became hollow monuments. And still, humanity said nothing. No declarations. No propaganda. Just execution. What the Zarn had never understood was that humans did not aspire to replace them. They aimed to ensure no one ever followed their path again. With their empire in ruins, the Zarn turned inward. Gone were their boasts, their posturing. In its place, doubt spread like a virus. Civil order fractured as remaining provincial leaders issued conflicting commands, some pleading for peace, others threatening retaliation that no longer had the machinery to be enforced. But humanity did not pause. No gesture of surrender had been offered, and they weren't waiting for one. Instead, they turned their attention to the remnants, the quiet collaborators, the complicit merchants, the sympathetic voices in the Dominion who had cheered conquest from afar. Names, dates, transactions, nothing was forgotten. Human intelligence archives were exhaustive. They didn't just dismantle regimes, they erased every network that had profited from the Zarn war engine. Trade hubs collapsed overnight. Entire planetary economies spiraled as key figures vanished, arrested or quietly eliminated by proxy agents. Humanity did not seek to punish. They sought to cleanse. Without borders to defend or colonies to expand, the Terran mandate became ideological. Not in speech, but in action. They struck only when they had proof. Always silent. Always final. On the outer worlds, puppet governors who once parroted Dominion authority found themselves targeted by precision orbital insertions, small, silent drops that lasted seconds. Their palaces remained intact. Their guards untouched. But they themselves were never seen again. The galaxy finally understood. Humanity wasn't executing a war campaign. They were enforcing a principle: aggression would not be tolerated. Dominion or otherwise. And still, they made no claims. No annexations. No declarations of supremacy. Terran forces would strike, dismantle, and leave. Worlds left behind were free to govern themselves, so long as they never rebuilt what had been broken. Former Dominion systems expected control to be replaced by new rulers. None came. They waited for colonization. It never arrived. Earth didn't want to rule. It wanted silence. From the ashes of the Zarn, no Terran banners were raised. No monuments erected. Just scars. But the message spread. Neutral systems began voluntary disarmament. Not under threat, but from realization. They dismantled their own offensive fleets. Dismantled propaganda machines. Scrapped doctrines that once leaned toward militarism. Trade shifted. New alliances formed quietly around human presence, not because of coercion, but from fear of drawing scrutiny. Terran observers appeared without announcement in high-level councils. Not as delegates. As witnesses. Discussions changed immediately. Language softened. Policies shifted toward diplomacy and transparency. Human presence was rarely direct, but its weight was constant. One glance toward Earth's silent orbit, and caution prevailed. The old powers whispered among themselves, trying to understand. What drove this relentless efficiency? Why strike so hard, so fast, and then walk away? The answer lay buried in human history. A legacy not of conquest, but consequence. Humanity had not emerged from peace. Their civilizations had risen from centuries of fire. Their archives held records of wars so brutal, extinction had nearly become a self-inflicted inevitability. They had once been the threat. They had seen the end, stared into it, and clawed back from the brink. When they stepped onto the galactic stage, it was not with ambition, but with a vow. Never again. The Zarn had broken that vow. They had tested the boundary and found not a wall, but a blade. What they received wasn't disproportionate retaliation, it was the complete measure of their crime, paid in full. Other species took note. Quietly, cultural institutions across dozens of worlds began integrating Terran military ethics as study. Not to mimic strength, but to understand restraint. Humanity's most terrifying power wasn't in their weapons, but in their choice to use them only once, decisively. Peace, for the first time in galactic memory, was no longer a fragile negotiation. It became a necessity. And yet, despite everything, Earth remained quiet. No grandstanding. No monuments to victory. They returned to their systems, to their orbits, to their silence. Fleets docked. Protocols deactivated. The war ended not with treaty or trial, but with the absence of further violence. Humanity didn't broadcast what it had done. It didn't need to. The galaxy remembered. Years passed. The Zarn Dominion no longer existed. What remained were fragmented territories, renamed by local leaders, disconnected from the old central regime. No effort to rebuild the empire had succeeded. The very idea of reunification was avoided. Every system once aligned with Zarn rule lived under quiet understanding. Do not provoke, do not unify for conquest, do not draw attention. The Terran Confederacy, meanwhile, faded from active diplomacy. No overt political presence. No expansionist agenda. Their fleets stayed home. Their soldiers unseen. But the fear remained, quiet, constant, earned. Terran silence wasn't ignorance. It was vigilance. Everyone knew the humans were still watching. Scattered across former Zarn space, deep space observatories reported unexplained sensor anomalies. Brief power fluctuations. Ghost signatures resembling Terran tech. No contact, no response, just reminders. Somewhere, somehow, Earth still monitored the edges. It wasn't control. It was deterrence. New governments that rose from Zarn ruins built themselves differently. Democratic federations formed where once there had been castes. Militaries were reduced, not from pacifism, but pragmatism. No world wanted to be the next lesson. Political rhetoric shifted universally. Strength was no longer measured by fleets, but by diplomacy, trade, and neutrality. One by one, species began adopting the Terran doctrine, not through mimicry, but acknowledgement. Not peace through strength. Peace through consequence. Humanity's impact went beyond war. Their precision, their refusal to conquer, rewrote the model of galactic power. Empires began fading from memory, replaced by coalitions and agreements. Formerly hostile neighbors opened quiet dialogues. Not because they trusted one another, but because they feared what came next if they didn't. In academic circles, entire disciplines emerged to study the Terran campaign. Not from admiration, but analysis. How a species with comparatively fewer colonies and no imperial ambition dismantled the mightiest regime without assuming its place. Tactical reviews were published, redacted, reclassified. Every major military academy rewrote its doctrine, centralizing one question: how far is too far? Because the moment that line was crossed, everyone knew what would follow. For humanity, the war was closed history. But they hadn't forgotten. They didn't move on. They moved differently. Quietly, they expanded their network of listening stations. Silent drones mapped uncharted regions, not for conquest, but for early warning. Defense networks remained active beneath calm skies. Earth itself, though peaceful, pulsed with readiness. Cities were rebuilt with dual-purpose infrastructure. Universities taught diplomacy alongside asymmetric strategy. Children learned not about glory, but about the cost of silence and the weight of measured response. Human veterans rarely spoke of the conflict. Not from trauma, but from duty. Their service wasn't celebrated, it was remembered. Their enemies weren't cursed, they were acknowledged. The war was not glorified. It was studied. Quietly, respectfully, permanently. In time, former Tsarn colonies sought limited contact. Not to rebuild ties, but to understand. Cultural envoys were allowed onto Terran ground under strict guidelines. What they found was not arrogance or conquest, but discipline. The most advanced civilization they had encountered, armed to the teeth, yet restrained by choice. This unnerved them more than any weapon ever could. Humanity made no threats. They offered no ultimatums. But the galaxy had seen what happened when one was delivered to Earth. There would never be a second. From the outer rim to the central stars, this memory remained sharp. A collective scar. Not one carved in hatred, but in reverence. A reminder that while humanity had returned to silence, it was a silence earned through fire, strategy, and precision. Other powers still rose. Trade routes shifted. Alliances formed and fell. But the balance was never the same. There was no great power now, only a shadow. One that didn't seek dominion, yet would never allow tyranny again. The Tsarn had not merely been defeated. They had been unwritten. And with that, the galaxy changed forever. Not because humanity demanded it, but because they had proven what happens when you demand war from those who've mastered it.